The overnight shift at St. Mary's Hospital in New York City was usually quiet, a silence broken only by the occasional beep of monitors or the soft shuffle of nurses moving from room to room. But tonight, for Emily Carter, 26, that silence felt heavier than usual. She stood outside room 409, clutching a fresh pack of bandages to her chest like a shield against whatever waited behind that door. Inside lay Alexander Hayes, 32 years old, a self-made tech millionaire, and for the past 4 months, a ghost kept alive by machines and wires. Newspapers had called him the golden mind behind Hayes Tech, the ruthless visionary who turned ideas into empires before breakfast. But none of that power meant anything here. In this room, he was just a man who had not opened his eyes since the night his car slammed into a barrier along the FDR Drive. Emily's hand hovered over the doorknob as she drew a steady breath. They all said he could not hear anything. The neurologists explained the scans, the flat lines, where there should have been sparks of life. Some nurses whispered he was as good as gone, just a rich shell whose family could not let him go. Emily never argued with them. She just came in every night and did her job, changing bandages, checking the lines, listening to the machines breathe for him. But she did one thing more. She talked to him. No one told her to. There were no instructions on any clipboards saying, "Talk to the coma patient about your day." Yet each time she stepped into his room, she felt words bubbling inside her, begging to be spoken. Maybe it was the way the pale light from the street lamps outside fell across his face, making him look almost peaceful. Or maybe it was the way his hand sometimes twitched, like he was searching for something he could not find. She pushed open the door and stepped inside. The soft whir of the ventilator greeted her first, then the steady rhythm of the heart monitor. Alexander lay still under crisp white sheets, his dark hair a mess against the pillow. Emily crossed the room, turned on the small reading lamp beside his bed, and spoke as if greeting a friend who might look up any second. "Good evening, Mr. Hayes," she said softly while setting down the bandages. "They say snow's coming early this year, first week of November, and the forecast says we might see flakes tomorrow night." She smiled at the absurdity of talking about the weather to a man who had not said a word in months. Still, it felt right. She worked carefully, unwrapping the old dressing from the IV site on his arm, being gentle with the bruised skin. Her fingers moved with quiet precision, the way her mother had taught her. Emily hummed under her breath, an old tune her mother sang when she was little and afraid of the dark. Tonight, the tune caught in her throat. She looked at his face and whispered, "I hope you can hear me. Just in case you are stuck somewhere dark and quiet, I want you to know someone is here. You are not alone." The machines answered with their steady beeps. He did not move. His chest rose and fell in time with the ventilator, but his eyelids did not flicker. Emily pressed the fresh bandage into place, then rested her palm on the back of his hand. It felt warm, real, not the hand of a ghost, but of a man still here in some hidden corner. She leaned closer, her voice barely louder than the hum of the machines. "They say you can't hear me, Mr. Hayes. Maybe tomorrow you will prove them wrong." She cleared away the wrappers, turned off the lamp, and stood still for a moment looking at the quiet figure on the bed. Somewhere inside her, a strange certainty flickered like a stubborn flame. She could not explain it. She only knew that she would come back tomorrow night, and every night after that, until this silent man opened his eyes and told her he had heard every word. Emily Carter never imagined she would spend her nights talking to a man who could not answer. At 26, she had planned to work her way up through the busy corridors of St. Mary's, maybe join the pediatric unit or even trauma care, but somehow she found herself here, night after night, in the same quiet room where the city noise faded behind thick hospital glass. She was not from New York originally. She had grown up 3 states away, in a small town where everyone knew her mother as Nurse Kathy. Kathy Carter was the kind of woman who stayed at a patient's bedside, even when her shift ended, who believed that people needed kindness as much as they needed medicine. Emily grew up watching her mother push back hair from sweaty foreheads and whisper promises that pain would pass. She thought about that every time she stood over Alexander Hayes, wondering if her mother would have done the same. Emily came to St. Mary's on her own merit, no connections, no family left to open doors for her. Her father had died when she was 10. Her mother passed away when Emily was 18, just months before she graduated high school. Some people might have given up then, but Emily remembered how her mother had always said that every gentle word mattered, that no one should be left alone in their hardest moments. So Emily chose nursing, carrying forward the quiet legacy her mother left behind. She did not know, until much later, that her mother had once cared for Alexander Hayes's family too. Years ago, when Alexander's mother had battled cancer, Kathy Carter had been the private nurse who stayed through the worst nights. Emily only learned that fact on her first night with Alexander, when she saw a familiar old photograph on a shelf in the family waiting room, a picture of Kathy standing behind a much younger Alexander and his mother, both smiling despite the hospital gowns. It felt like a small thread binding her life to his, a piece of her mother's kindness stretching across years to find her here. Alexander Hayes was nothing like the stories the tabloids painted. To the world, he was the brilliant but cold tech mind who built Hayes Tech from a dorm room idea into an empire worth billions. They said he never trusted anyone, that he fired entire teams when they failed to meet impossible deadlines. He was famous for avoiding cameras and speaking in short sentences that gave nothing away, yet here, under the harsh glow of ICU lights, he looked almost fragile. The strong jawline and neat dark hair did not match the faint scars on his temple or the deep purple bruises that never fully faded from his ribs and arms. The crash that brought him here had happened on a rainy night. Some reports called it an accident, but whispers around the hospital suggested otherwise. There were rumors of brake lines cut, corporate enemies, maybe even betrayal inside his own boardroom. Emily did not care much for those rumors. What she cared about was the way his fingers sometimes twitched against the sheet when she spoke, the way his heartbeat steadied when she read to him from the paperback she always carried in her pocket. St. Mary's was not an ordinary hospital. It was one of the oldest in the city, with a private wing that only the wealthiest families could afford. Emily had worked hard to land a spot here, telling herself she would learn from the best, even if it meant pulling the longest, loneliest shifts. Most of the nurses stayed professional, distant, never lingering longer than necessary in a room where the patient never spoke. But Emily lingered. She lingered because something inside her refused to let him drift away completely. She told herself it was duty. She told herself it was respect. Maybe it was her mother's voice echoing in her head every time she walked into room 499 and saw a man everyone else had already given up on. She memorized the pattern of machines, the gentle hiss of the ventilator, the soft tap of his heartbeat on the monitor. She spoke to him about the snow coming early, about the stray cat she sometimes fed behind the staff parking lot, about her dream of becoming more than just another face in scrubs. She told him things she never told anyone else. Maybe because she knew he could not repeat them, or maybe because deep down she hoped he would. Outside, New York carried on like it always did, lights flickering, taxis honking, a city that swallowed loneliness with bright marquees and constant noise. But in room 49, Emily found a kind of quiet connection that felt real in a way no crowded bar or rush conversation ever did. She never called him Alexander. She never dared. He was always Mr. Hayes, a patient, a stranger, and yet not a stranger at all. And every night when she stepped out of that room, she whispered to herself that maybe tomorrow would be different. Maybe tomorrow he would open his eyes, and all the words she had poured into the silence would not be lost to the dark. It started with a book. Emily had always carried one tucked into her bag during long shifts. On nights when her rounds were quiet, she would slip into the break room and read a few pages to stay awake. One night, after changing Alexander's bandage and checking his monitors, she found herself sitting in the chair by his bed, the book balanced on her knees. She did not plan to read out loud, but the silence pressed too heavily on her shoulders. So she opened to where she had left off and began to speak, her voice filling the room like soft rain. She read about a boy who got lost in the woods and found his way home by following a trail of songs. Her words drifted through the tubes and the steady rhythm of the machines, and she imagined, for just a moment, that somewhere behind closed eyelids, Alexander was listening. The next night, she brought the book again, picking up where she had stopped. This time she watched his hand closely. She told herself she was just curious, nothing more, just a nurse doing her job. But when his index finger twitched against the blanket, something warm bloomed in her chest that she quickly buried under clinical logic. Maybe it was just a reflex. Maybe it was nothing. Still, she read to him again. Nights turned colder. Snow did come early, just as she had told him. She mentioned it when she cleaned the tubes near his neck, careful not to pull too hard, speaking softly about how the city looked softer under a fresh layer of white. She wondered if he missed the city, the chaos, the rush of meetings and late-night negotiations that had once defined him. Emily caught herself imagining what his voice might sound like if he could answer her. Would he have laughed at her stories about the stray cat behind the hospital dumpsters, the one she named Whiskey because of its scruffy orange fur and independent attitude? She told him about Whiskey anyway. She told him about the time she spilled coffee on her scrubs and had to borrow a spare pair 2 sizes too big. She told him about the nights she missed her mother so much it felt like a bruise inside her chest. She did not know exactly when she started to see him as more than just a patient. Maybe it was the moment she brushed his hair back from his forehead and realized she liked the shape of his face, the stubborn line of his jaw that made him look younger than his headline suggested. Maybe it was when she caught herself hoping that if he woke up he might remember her voice first, that maybe her words would be the first thing he would reach for in the darkness. She scolded herself for thinking that way. Nurses did not fall for patients. They did not imagine futures built from whispered secrets in the middle of the night. But no matter how many times she repeated that rule in her head, her feet still found their way to room 499, even when she was off duty. She would slip in for a few minutes, check the machines, brush imaginary lint off his blanket. Once, she almost reached for his hand, but stopped, afraid someone might walk in. Some nights she was not alone in the hallway. Sarah from the day shift once caught her lingering outside the door after her official hours ended. Sarah raised an eyebrow and said, "Emily, you know this looks bad, right? Spending extra time in there. People talk." Emily forced a laugh and shrugged it off. "He doesn't have family here every night. Someone should sit with him a while. It's nothing." But it was something, and deep down Emily knew it. Gossip found its way through the nurse's station like spilled coffee creeping across paperwork. People started to say she was getting too attached, that maybe she hoped for something in return if the miracle happened, and the millionaire opened his eyes. Emily hated how their words stuck to her skin like oil. She wanted to shout that she would do this for any patient, that it did not matter how much money he had. She did not say it because she was not sure it was true. When she sat by his bed, she sometimes imagined his eyes opening, locking with hers. She imagined his voice, rough from disuse, whispering her name. Then she would stand and force herself to remember the truth. He was not hers. He belonged to a world she could never touch. In the quiet hours between midnight and dawn, she still read to him. She found new books, old books, poetry she barely understood but liked the sound of. Once she read a line that stuck with her all the way home. Sometimes the smallest whisper in the dark is enough to call a soul back from the edge. She wondered if that could really be true. She wondered if he could hear her at all. In his mind, buried under layers of silence, Alexander drifted in and out of something he could not name. There were long stretches of nothingness, black like deep water. And then there were moments when sound would cut through. A soft voice, a warm laugh, the hush of pages turning. He did not know who she was at first, only that the sound felt different from the cold touch of the nurses who spoke in hushed, professional tones when they changed his IV or checked his vitals. This voice stayed longer. This voice told him stories. filled the void with small pieces of a world he could not reach. He tried to move to find the source, but his body stayed heavy as stone. Sometimes her voice broke. He heard the shake in her words when she spoke about missing someone named Kathy. He tried to hold on to the name, but it slipped away like smoke. One night, he felt warmth against his hand, the soft weight of her palm resting there as she whispered about how the snow fell against the window glass. He focused every part of himself on that warmth, willing his fingers to curl around hers. But nothing happened except the smallest twitch that left him exhausted and floating again in darkness. In the hallways, the rumors kept growing. Emily overheard 2 nurses from the day shift whispering by the vending machine. He thinks he'll wake up and fall in love with her, like some fairy tale. Or maybe she just wants a piece of the Hayes fortune. I'd sit there too if it meant a payout. The words burned worse than any wound she had ever cleaned. She thought about quitting the night shift, asking for reassignment, but every time she pictured room 409 empty, the thought felt like betrayal. She could not leave him alone. Not when maybe he was still fighting to come back. Not when maybe her voice was the only thing he had left. She stayed. She told herself it was enough, that it was her duty, that when he woke up, if he woke up, he would never know her name, never know the secrets she had poured into the room like confessions. She told herself she could live with that, but when she sat there, at 4 a.m. with her fingers brushing the back of his hand, she knew she was lying. The first real crack in the stillness came on a night that started like any other. Emily's shift was nearly over when she slipped into room 49 for what she told herself would be just 5 minutes. She wanted to check the IV line one more time. She wanted to be sure the dressing on Alexander's arm was secure. Mostly, she just wanted to hear the sound of her own voice filling the silence before the day's staff took over. She was telling him about the snow again. New York had been hit with a second wave, heavier than the first, and the city looked softer, quieter under all that white. She said she wished he could see it, how the streetlights turned the snow into tiny falling stars. Her fingers brushed his wrist as she spoke. It was then that she noticed a folder half tucked under a stack of discharge forms on the small table near his bed. Emily hesitated, then reached for it. She knew she should not read patient files that were not assigned to her, but something about the way it was left there felt wrong. She flipped it open and saw rows of figures she did not understand at first. It was not a medical chart. It looked like an expense report, or maybe a funding request. The numbers made no sense. There were payments to companies she had never heard of, signed off by someone named Stephen Hayes. She knew that name. Stephen was Alexander's older half-brother, the one who had shown up once a week in an expensive coat and shiny shoes, barking orders at doctors and barely sparing a glance at the man in the bed. Emily frowned at the dates on the papers. Some of these payments were recent, weeks after the crash. She could not make sense of it, but her stomach twisted with the certainty that it was not supposed to be here. She heard footsteps in the hallway and quickly slipped the folder back into place. Her pulse hammered in her throat. She told herself she was imagining things, that it was none of her business. Still, she could not forget the numbers. Later that night, on her break, she found Carson near the staff coffee machine. Carson was Alexander's personal security chief. He had been around since the first day Alexander was brought in, always in the background, always watching. She liked Carson. He treated her with the same respect he gave the doctors. She hesitated before saying, "Mr. Carson, do you trust Stephen Hayes?" Carson raised one bushy eyebrow. "That's a dangerous question, Nurse Carter. Why do you ask?" She shook her head. "Maybe it's nothing. I just saw something strange. Payment signed by him, dated after the accident. I thought the company was on hold with Alex like this." Carson's expression turned colder, more focused. "Can you show me?" She hesitated, then nodded. Together, they went back to room 409. Emily slipped the folder out again, careful not to disturb the stack. Carson flipped through the pages, his eyes narrowing. "These companies don't exist, at least, not like this. Shells. Redirects. Emily did not know the word, but she could hear the edge in his voice. What does that mean? Carson closed the folder slowly. It means someone is bleeding Hayes Tech dry while Alex is stuck in this bed. And if you found this, then Stephen is sloppy. Or he wants us to find it too. Make it look like Alex was mishandling funds before the crash. Emily's stomach dropped. But Alex can't even... Carson's voice dropped. Which is exactly why it works. He can't defend himself. The board wants him declared incompetent. Sign over power of attorney. Stephen steps in. The company's his, no question. Emily felt the cold from the snow seep under her skin, even though she was standing under hospital fluorescents. Can we stop him? Carson tucked the folder under his arm. Not yet. Not like this. I'll make copies. Keep them safe. You didn't see anything. You didn't touch anything, understand? She nodded, but deep down she knew she could not just pretend. That night when she went back into Alexander's room, her heart raced faster than usual. She pulled up the chair, sat by his bed, and whispered, I don't know if you can hear me, but I need you to fight. They think you can't come back. They think you're done. Prove them wrong. Please. She stayed longer than she should have. Her shift ended an hour before dawn, but she sat there until the sun slipped between the buildings, turning the snow outside into a blinding sea of white. She only left when she heard the day nurses arriving, voices echoing in the hallway like reminders that the world did not stop for her secrets. The next night, she found her hours cut without warning. Her supervisor pulled her aside and said, Emily, there's concern about your emotional involvement with a patient. You're being reassigned to the general wing until further notice. She felt heat crawl up her neck. Who complained? The supervisor would not look her in the eye. It came from above. You should rest. You've been here too much. Emily knew what that meant. Stephen Hayes had gotten wind of her questions. He wanted her gone, out of the way. That night, instead of clocking out, she went to Carson. He handed her a small flash drive. Keep this safe. If anything happens to me, you find a reporter you trust and give them this. She looked at the tiny piece of plastic like it was burning her fingers. Carson, I'm a nurse. I don't know how to fight people like this. Carson's voice softened. You already are, just by being here, just by talking to him. She slipped the drive into her pocket. Her hands trembled, but her resolve did not. She went back into Alexander's room one last time before they locked her out for good. She sat on the edge of the bed, leaned close to his ear, and whispered, They think they can silence us, but you're stronger than this. I know you are. If you can hear me, please, give me something, anything. She took his hand, pressed her thumb over his pulse. It fluttered steady under her touch. She thought she felt a twitch, but she told herself not to hope too much. Hope hurt more than any truth. The day shift nurse found her there an hour later and told her she needed to leave. Emily did, but not before brushing her lips against his temple so lightly it could have been a dream. She left the hospital that morning into a swirl of snow, clutching her bag tight against her side. In her pocket, the flash drive felt heavier than all her fears. She told herself she would find a way to keep him safe. She would not be the girl who just watched the machines breathe for him. She would be the voice that reminded him he was still here, still fighting. Somewhere behind the wall of sleep, Alexander heard her voice, softer than the cold, warmer than the dark. He could not move yet, but he held onto the sound, the promise. The warmth pressed against his skin like an anchor that would not let him drift away forever. Emily did not sleep the night they suspended her. She sat in her small studio apartment with the flash drive burning a hole in her pocket and the city snow piling up outside her window. She made coffee she did not drink, paced the worn carpet until dawn, and read every headline about Alexander Hayes she could find. Each article said the same thing. A tragic accident. A brilliant young CEO clinging to life, a family committed to doing what was best. Nowhere did any of them mention the payments she had seen, the quiet way Stephen Hayes had begun to make himself the new face of Hayes Tech, while Alexander lay silent and helpless. She thought about the rumors, the whispered theories that someone had tampered with the car, the way Carson's voice had gone tight when he said it was an inside job. Emily had never seen herself as someone who could stand up to men like Stephen Hayes. She was a nurse, not an investigator, not a lawyer. She was not even sure she could trust the press. But she could trust Carson. She could trust Alexander. She believed that, deep in whatever darkness he was trapped in, he was fighting. He just needed a reason to come back. 2 days passed. She stayed away from the hospital, trying to obey the suspension, but every few hours she found herself halfway out the door with her keys in hand. She texted Carson once. No reply. The third night she stood across the street from St. Mary's, collar turned up against the wind, watching the windows of the ICU flicker with soft light. Room 409 was dark. She wondered if someone else was there, if they were changing his bandages with the same care, if they bothered to speak to him at all. She doubted it. When she turned to leave, a hand landed on her shoulder. Carson. He looked tired, older than he had when she first met him. He pulled her into the shadow of a closed flower shop. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. "You know that, right?" She nodded. "I just needed to see him, one last time." Carson hesitated, then slipped her a folded piece of paper. "I got what we need. This ties it all to Stephen. He's moving to pull the plug. Says the machines are too expensive, the prognosis too hopeless. Board votes tomorrow. They'll declare Alex incompetent and move on. Stephen gets everything." Emily felt her knees weaken. "They can't do that. He's still in there. I know he is." Carson's eyes softened. "I know you believe that. That's why I'm giving this to you. It's not my place anymore. It's yours." Emily unfolded the paper. It was a contact, a journalist's name and number, someone Carson trusted. Someone who would listen. She tucked it inside her coat, felt the weight of the flash drive against her ribs. What about Alex? If they pull the plug, Carson held up a hand. Not yet. They're playing it safe for appearances, waiting for the vote. If something changes before then, if Alex shows any sign of cognitive response, they can't do it. It buys time. Emily heard the message buried in his words. If he wakes up, if he fights, if he can hear her. Carson pressed a key card into her hand. One more night, but make it count. Emily slipped inside the hospital just past midnight. The halls were half lit, quiet except for the echo of distant monitors and the squeak of her shoes against polished tile. She found room 409 in darkness. Alexander lay where she had left him, unchanged and yet different. She pulled up the chair, wrapped her cold fingers around his warm wrist and whispered, "It's me. I shouldn't be here, but I am. They're going to take everything from you. I don't know if you can hear me, but I need you to fight, now more than ever." She told him everything, about the payments, about the fake companies, about Stephen, about how she was nobody, but she could not watch him lose everything he had built while he lay silent. She leaned close, forehead nearly touching his. "You can't let him win. Please come back. Just give them a sign." She thought she felt his fingers shift under hers, but it could have been her imagination. She stayed the whole night, whispering stories, promises, memories that were hers and his. She told him about her mother again, how Kathy Carter had once sat in another room just like this one, holding another hand that everyone thought was too far gone. She promised him that she would not stop speaking, not until he spoke back. Sometime around 4 a.m, she fell asleep in the chair, cheek resting on the edge of his bed, her hand curled around his. She dreamed she heard him say her name, the softest whisper. When she woke, the sun was a thin line behind the blinds. Her neck ached, her fingers were numb. She lifted her head slowly, embarrassed at having drifted off, and found his eyes open. Just a sliver at first, dark lashes fluttering like wings, but definitely open. For a heartbeat, she thought she was still dreaming. Then he blinked. She scrambled to her feet, her knees knocking against the metal bed frame. "Alex?" His lips parted, but no sound came. His eyes locked onto hers. She felt the floor tilt beneath her. She pressed the call button, heart hammering, then turned back to him. He was trying to speak. She leaned in, close enough to feel the soft warmth of his breath. His voice was broken, cracked from months of silence, but she heard it. Emily. One word, her name. The door burst open behind her. Nurses flooded in, then a doctor. Voices tangled in urgent instructions, questions she barely heard. Someone moved her aside, but she kept her eyes on him, refusing to let go of his hand. He did not look away either. His lips shaped the word again. Emily. She wanted to cry. She wanted to laugh. She wanted to tell every gossiping nurse in the break room that she had been right all along. He was still here. He had heard every word. And now, he was back. The hospital buzzed for days after Alexander Hayes opened his eyes. Doctors came and went in quick rotations, each eager to see for themselves the man who had beaten the odds. They poked at his reflexes, checked the scans that had once shown hopeless silence, but now flickered with bright new lines of activity. They spoke to him in careful tones, asking him to squeeze their fingers, follow their light, say his name. Each small response spread through the ICU like a spark catching dry grass. Emily stayed as close as she could. She sat at the edge of the room while nurses moved around him. She answered questions when the specialists asked about his reactions. She spoke for him when his throat refused to push out more than a cracked whisper. Every time he looked at her, her pulse danced in her ears. He was there, he was listening, and he remembered. The first real conversation came in pieces, rasped syllables shaped by more determination than breath. She was alone with him late one night, the others having left to give him rest he refused to take. His eyes found hers in the dim glow of the reading lamp she always turned on for him. "You stayed," he said, the words broken but clear enough to feel like thunder to her. She nodded, fighting the tears that threatened to embarrass her. "Of course I did. Someone had to keep talking to you." His lips cracked into the ghost of a smile. "Heard everything." His hand shifted across the blanket, searching for hers. She gave it willingly, threading their fingers together like it was the most natural thing in the world. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I wasn't supposed to be here. They suspended me. They said I crossed a line." He squeezed her hand, weak but real. "Thank you for crossing it." Carson came in later, quiet and watchful as ever. He filled in the blanks while Alexander drifted between sleep and short bursts of waking. The flash drive Emily had hidden away became their shield. The files Carson had gathered were proof of Stefan's plan to drain Hayes Tech and step in as guardian of what remained. Without Alexander able to speak, the board would have signed the papers. Now, with his eyes open and words forming again, that path closed. But it did not close easily. News leaked within days. Gossip sites ran stories about the miraculous recovery. Within hours, they turned their spotlight on Emily, too. An anonymous post claimed she was more than a nurse, that she had manipulated a vulnerable man for personal gain, that she had latched onto the comatose millionaire hoping to ride the wave of pity and scandal into a payout. She saw it first on her phone while waiting outside the ICU. The headline made her stomach turn. Angel, nurse, or gold digger? Inside the comments, strangers who had never met her spun theories uglier than anything she had feared. She felt her face burn as she scrolled. The rumors she had ignored for weeks among her coworkers now screamed from every gossip site that needed clicks. Carson found her like that, staring at her screen with numb fingers. "Turn it off," he told her firmly. "It's garbage. They'll move on." She tried to believe them, but the whispers followed her through the hospital halls. Colleagues who once nodded politely now looked away. Some gave her a pitying smile she hated more than the suspicion. One night she found Alexander half asleep, his voice rough but stronger than before. "You look sad." She shook her head, but he knew better. "Tell me," he pressed. She hesitated, then confessed. About the articles, about the way people stared, about how she wondered if staying had been a mistake after all. His brow furrowed, a spark of the fierce determination that once built a company from nothing flickering back to life behind tired eyes. "My fault," he rasped. "I fix it." She brushed her thumb across the back of his hand. "Just focus on getting better. That's what matters." But Alexander Hayes did not build empires by sitting quietly. The next morning, against the protests of every nurse on his care team, he insisted on being propped up. He demanded his phone. He made them help him hold it steady enough to type a single message that he posted himself. No press release, no lawyer to soften the edges, just a photo of him in the hospital bed, pale but awake, Emily's hand visible where it rested in his. The caption read, "This woman saved my life when I could not fight for it myself. Anyone who says otherwise can come say it to my face now that I'm awake." The photo exploded online within hours. Reporters camped outside St. Mary's. The board at Hayes Tech scrambled to handle the fallout. Stephen Hayes went silent. Emily watched the storm unfold from a plastic chair by Alexander's bed, torn between relief and dread. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered when they were alone. His eyelids drifted open, heavy but certain. "Yes, I did." The scandal that threatened to drown her turned overnight. Journalists who had called her a gold digger now wrote about her devotion. Former patients she had cared for came forward with quiet stories of how Nurse Carter had sat with them through pain no one else stayed for. It helped. It did not erase the gossip, but it pushed it to the shadows where truth burned brighter. Alexander's strength returned in slow, stubborn steps. Physical therapy sessions left him pale and shaking, but every time Emily tried to leave, he found her hand. "Stay," he would rasp. And she did. One afternoon, when he managed to stand with the help of a walker, he looked at her with eyes that held more gratitude than any thank you could contain. "You believe in me when no one did," he said, the words stronger now, voice rough but real. "You are the reason I came back." Emily wanted to argue, say it was all him, but part of her knew it was both of them. A silent man and the nurse who refused to stop speaking until he found his voice again. As the days passed, the talk of company board meetings and legal maneuvers filled the space around his bed. Carson handled what he could. Lawyers came and went with thick folders and tight smiles. Through it all, Alexander kept Emily close. He asked her to read to him like before, to remind him of the nights when her voice was the only thing he could hold on to. Sometimes, between pages, he would reach for her hand and simply breathe with her there. When his discharge date arrived, the hospital lobby overflowed with cameras. Reporters called his name. Emily hovered at his side, head down, wishing she could disappear behind her scrubs. Alexander paused before the cameras, one hand on the armrest of his wheelchair, the other reaching for hers. He held it tight, so everyone could see. His voice was clearer now, each word careful but unbroken. "This woman is not a headline. She is my friend, my family. She stayed when everyone else turned away. If you have questions about my recovery, ask me. If you have questions about her, you ask me too." Emily's heart rattled in her chest as flashes popped like fireworks. She thought about pulling her hand away, but his grip tightened. She knew then there was no going back to the quiet days of whispered secrets and hidden glances. They had stepped into the light together, and neither of them would ever stand alone again. The headlines faded, the way they always do. New stories rose to bury old ones. Scandals lost their heat, and the world found new gossip to chew on. But for Emily, what remained was not the noise, but the quiet truth that she and Alexander had built between whispers and beeping monitors. A month after he left St. Mary's, he asked her to meet him at a small park tucked behind the city's oldest library. She almost said no. She almost let fear win. But when she saw him waiting under bare branches, a blanket draped over his knees, she knew she would have come even if the whole world watched. He looked stronger than he had the day he left the hospital, but his eyes still held that raw edge of gratitude that made her heart twist. She sat beside him on the cold bench and felt the city hum just beyond the iron fence. He turned to her slowly, taking her hand in both of his fingers warm and sure. "You know you changed my life," he said, voice steady now, no trace of the broken whisper it had once been. Emily tried to smile, but her throat closed around the words she wanted to say. He squeezed her hand, grounding her the way she had once anchored him. "When I was lost in the dark, your voice was the only thing that felt real. You gave me something to hold on to when I could not hold on by myself." She found her voice in the soft hush of the wind. "You fought your way back, I just talked." He shook his head. "No, you did more than talk. You stayed. You gave me back my life when I could not ask for it." He pulled a small box from his coat pocket. She froze. It was not the polished velvet of some grand proposal, but a simple wooden thing, rough around the edges, like a promise that did not need to be perfect to be real. He opened it to reveal a thin silver band, plain and honest. "I do not care what the world says. I do not care what they think you wanted. I know what I want. I want you beside me. Always." Emily's breath caught. She thought of all the nights she sat beside a man who could not answer her, pouring out secrets she thought he would never remember. She thought of the rumors, the eyes that followed her through hallways, the whispers that called her a fool or worse. None of it mattered now. She nodded once, her answer as quiet and certain as every promise she had whispered in that hospital room. He slid the ring onto her finger, his hands still trembling from the weakness that would take time to fade. She leaned in, resting her forehead against his. For a long moment, the city noise fell away. There was only the heartbeat she felt against her skin, the warmth of his breath, and the simple truth that some loves are born not from grand gestures, but from the soft courage to stay when leaving would have been easier. Months later, when they stood together at the launch of the Hayes Carter Foundation, cameras flashed, but she did not look away. They built the foundation to fund care for patients like him, to support nurses like her, to remind anyone listening that kindness can change a life long before medicine ever does. When people asked how Alexander Hayes had survived the darkness, he always said the same thing. He survived because a young nurse sat beside him every night and refused to believe he was gone. And when people asked Emily why she stayed, she only smiled and said softly that sometimes the smallest whisper in the dark is all it takes to bring someone home.